Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Standout Podcast. My name is Landon Enns, and we're going to be doing something a little different today. If you've watched our other episodes, you'll know that we typically have 2 to 5 people here, but today it's just going to be me. So, if you wish to wish me luck, then go ahead and press the thumbs up and leave us a comment down below with your thoughts after the video is over. We appreciate all the comments and likes that we get on the videos. It really helps improve it for the YouTube algorithm. Today's episode is going to be about context and why it is important to us as Christians and how we can continue to work on it. If you have any questions, as always, leave it in the comments down below, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. And let's get into this. So, what is the definition of context? The definition of context is the circumstances that form the setting for an event, statement, or idea, and in terms of which it can be fully understood and assessed. This means it's the ideas that go around a subject. For example, if I was speaking to a group of people from one singular town, and I wanted to make a reference that they all knew, I would reference something in that town, something that they all passed every day. Maybe it's a sign on a road. To other people, that sign might appear as a metaphor or an allusion towards something else, but they might not know if they're reading down the words I spoke. They might not know that I'm referring to an actual sign that could be symbolic for something else. However, it was originally designed to speak to that one original crowd. So, what are the questions we need to ask when we're observing context? Some of these questions we need to take very seriously. For example, what's the situation? What's going on in that particular chapter of the Bible? What's the time like? Are we at war? Are there bad things going on? Who's in charge? Who's the main character? Is he supported or not supported by God at that time? We got to figure that stuff out. What are the factors, individual factors? These would be, once you have identified the situation, you can start finding the individual factors. For example, why is said person not in favor with God? And if you wanted to go a bit farther, you could even consider how said person could go back to God. And oftentimes we do see them go back to God, or other times we don't. There's many examples of either or. We also need to wonder, what is the culture of the time? Because that's going to determine a lot of the writing style and choices made by the different authors of the Bible. They are going to choose specific things that they have experienced because they are writing for the current time. Unless it's prophecies, which is a whole different boatload. Just briefly, they're speaking about the future. They're not trying to always make allusions. It's typically very cut and paste. Finally, the last thing we need to consider about the context is, what does it mean? What is the overall impact of a setting or the context of a situation? How does it fit into the grander picture of the stories of the different covenants and God's plan for humanity and the world, starting with the fall of man in Genesis and moving forward into the different areas throughout the Bible? We had Abraham, Moses, moving on into the different kings, the different stories there. You had Psalms and the different stuff revealed in Proverbs, which is more poetry, but it still reveals a lot about the context and cultural values of the time. And it is important to note that cultural values do change. I know the Jews are very strict upon their cultural values. They honestly have not changed very much in the past 25 years, or not 25 years. For a long time, they haven't changed. We'll leave it that way. They're pretty traditional. They add stuff to it, though, which is very interesting to see. If you look back over time, has evolved into almost something new, although it is still the same core principles, so it is classified as the same thing. What are the times? So what I mean by this is, what's going on? Like I said earlier, what's the situation? What are the times? Who's in charge? Who's conquering what? Who's the big dog of the Middle Eastern area? What religions are opponents to Judaism? And finally, what are the people groups around the area? They're going to have a lot of influence as to how the Israelites view the outside world and how they speak about the so-called Gentiles. This is going to reflect upon different areas of the Bible, specifically in the Old Testament and the Gospels, when Jesus is confronted by different problems with the Gentiles. A great example of this is the woman at the well, and how he treated her well, even though she was not an Israelite. It proves that Christianity is not just for the Jews. The Messiah, it was not just for the Jews. The Messiah was for the world. Some biblical proof for context can be seen in 2 Timothy 3:16. All scripture is breathed out by God and is profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness. We're going to focus on the reproof and correction portion of that, because that's, in essence, what's that directing is the idea that we can use the Bible to understand the the concepts and philosophies presented inside it, such as how to live, how to act. It's not going to give direct guidance. So if you're asking the Bible how to play your best golf game on Sunday morning while you're skipping out of church to go play in a tournament, it's not going to exactly help you on that one. But it can help you in other areas, such as how do I know God's plan? How can I trust in God? How can I have faith? And how can I be saved? One of the core examples that we don't focus on enough and we really should focus on more. So this brings us to the natural question of, should we focus on principles or direct instructions? So let's go ahead and break this down. Let's start out with direct instructions. Direct instructions are very cut and dry. They're very straight to the point. They're very exact. And we can see a lot of direct instructions in the Old Testament. If you want to think of a physical example, think about the measurements of the ark or the measurements of the tabernacle. Think about something that can be measured quantitatively. And this was to provide a baseline for what was later to come, which is you have to have a solid foundation in order to build up, and some more abstract ideas. Direct instructions were very valued because it wasn't up for interpretation. If you left something up for interpretation in the Old Testament times, and even moving into the New Testament times, you could often be called a heretic, because it was said that you had no proof that God was talking to you in that way. So if you could not prove it, then how could you be right? How could you be truthful in that scenario? On the other hand, principles are larger ideas that can be applied into many different scenarios. However, they are not directly commanded sometimes. And we see this a lot in the New Testament, where we are simply directed to go and do, or even if you want to put it this way, the use of a modern sermon, which would be you take a message, you find Bible verses to support it, and then you present your ideas with support from the Bible, presented as a complete and whole concept. They're called principles because they do not always apply in every situation. However, they apply in most situations. Think of a principle being loving. Let's go with a different principle. A different principle could be the story of Jesus telling the rich man to sell his house and follow him if he wanted to follow Jesus. The principle was not that nobody should be wealthy. That is not what the moral of the story is. The principle was you need to remove obstacles that are unique to yourself before you pursue God fully. And that also can come back to, Jesus talking about, or not, maybe that wasn't Jesus, I'll have to look that up. But they were talking about how you cannot fully serve the world and fully serve God. I think that was Jesus, yeah. And it's a very interesting concept because we often use money as that's the thing a lot of people are attracted to. However, there are many other different things. We have relationships, cars, even houses, any physical material or something that is non-transferable into heaven could fall into this category. So we've talked about the context of context, if you will. Now, how do we apply context? So when you are reading a passage in the Bible, you're going to need to start to break it down. And what I mean by that is read the whole chapter. Don't just read a couple verses, read the whole chapter. You're going to understand what it's about. What's the core ideas? And then you want to find out how your verse relates to that core idea. From there, you can branch out from your verse and look at unique, independent points that show the true meaning of that passage, and they support the main central idea of that passage. If we want to look at an example, I have Revelations 3 pulled up, and specifically I'm looking at the section to the church in Laodicea, which are verses 14 through 22. Typically, when we look at this, we focus on verses 15, 16, and 17, which are, I know your deeds, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish you were either one or the other. So, because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I am about to spit you out of my mouth. You say, I am rich, I have acquired wealth, and do not need a thing. But you do not realize that you are wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. When we look at this verse, oftentimes it's taught in a way that focuses on the actions of Christians, or how to not be a quote-unquote lukewarm Christian, which is a good concept. However, we're not looking at the context here. The context is, in Laodicea, there were hot springs and there were cold springs. And these springs, nobody wanted a lukewarm spring. If you have a cold spring, you're going to go get cold water. If you want hot water, you're going to go get hot water. Nobody wants lukewarm water. So this is an allusion or a relation that John is making to these churches, because it's something they understood. It's something local. They could easily identify it and relate it to their life as to how it is supposed to improve their walk with Christ. They know what the setting is. They know what the context is. So they're easily able to identify the core message of this passage. We could also furthermore talk about context in other situations. Apologetics is something that many Christians are starting to get into more and more. And it's something that I think all Christians should at least learn the basics of, which is the providing a defense of the Christian faith. And one problem I've noticed with apologetics courses are that they do not provide enough context to situations. They merely show you how to present an argument with already given facts, but they do not allow for exploration nor explanation in many scenarios. And this is a problem because to anybody beyond an average IQ, they will not believe you. The smart people will not believe you because you have very little proof, very rocky proof. You do not have direct correlation between what your ideas are and what your central idea is. So you really need to be careful if you're using the Bible especially to make sure that you find passages and context around a passage if you're using it for apologetics to make sure that you accurately understand it. You can accurately provide an explanation of it quickly, and to make sure that you use it to the best of its ability. So use it efficiently. Not just use it, but use it well. And again, that goes back to the ideas of direct instructions or principles. In apologetics, you're focusing on principles because that is what is highly debated, typically speaking, and direct instructions are left more for the tight-knit communities of scholars who want to scour the Bible to find some new revelation somewhere hidden in between the words. We don't really need to, as everyday Christians, we don't need to focus on that as much. However, the principles idea is something that everybody should have nailed down. In other countries, a lot of times missionaries going to third world countries will use only one of the gospels to spread the word. That way they can iron in the core ideas and core principles before they begin to bring in the other correlations to the different gospels. This also makes it easier to distribute and translate the Bible to these communities, but it definitely helps on the reinforcement of principles in these third world and oftentimes stubborn communities. That, needless to say though, these people do need the word, and it's very good that we are able to provide it to them in some fashion, especially being a fashion that presents the core principles of salvation. If you want to apply this in your everyday life, what you need to do is just make it a habit. Start researching stuff. Don't just sit there and read or research stuff. Find out more about something in the Bible. Going farther, there's lots of stuff on the internet and in books about specific passages that can really help improve your understanding, because there's general revelation, which can be taught, and then there is individual revelation. And I've been taught this by one of my teachers, and he has ironed it into me that something that you receive as a revelation, something is revealed to you that you suddenly understand, doesn't mean you can transmit that to somebody else. Everybody has to make their own revelations in some capacity, or it doesn't matter to them. Why should they care? They shouldn't. They have no reason to, because it was not theirs to begin with. So everybody needs to make sure that they are able to identify different components that provide individual revelation. This could be anything from looking at a map of a certain area in the Middle East to researching how food was prepared in Israel. I'm just making stuff up here, but I'm sure there's some way you could provide that to a Bible verse and make revelation out of it and learn about yourself, about God, about the Bible, and grow in your walk with Christ. It's important that we provide context in our discussions, debates, and our arguments, because, well, quite frankly, without context, it's all quite useless. The devil even uses the Bible, and he very much used it out of context when he was tempting Jesus in the desert. And that's why it's important to make sure that we use the right context in the right scenarios. It's important because if even the devil can use the Bible to support his claims, what can we do on accident when we don't even know how far our context goes? So if I had to sum this up for you guys, I would say we need to ask questions about a situation, about a passage, about a verse, about a chapter, about a book. Learn what the culture was like. Learn what the culture was like. And that way you understand the people who were writing and experiencing the events being told. Also, check out the factors, the political, the military factors of that Bible verse. Oftentimes, there's a war going on. Sometimes there's not. Is there a famine? Is there a flood? Is it dry? Has it rained in a while? We don't know. That's why you got to figure it out. Who is the target audience? Who was the book or the passage being written to? It's important to know this because we can then kind of decipher the principles involved in a Bible verse or passage. And we must always, as Christians living in the 21st century in America or beyond, focus on principles over the direct instructions of the Old Testament. This is an oversimplification, but typically speaking, again, principles are a part of the New Testament, the New Covenant, while direct instructions are a part of the Old Testament, Old Covenant. This makes sure that we are able to implement these philosophies and these ideas into our daily lives, rather than merely execute and follow the written plan. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this episode up, guys. I know it's a little bit of a shorter one, but I'm doing the best I can. So, if you guys have any topic suggestions you would like to give to us, we will certainly look into them. Go ahead and leave those in the comments below. You can also email us. Our email is on the YouTube description. Send it in. We'll take a look over it. We'll try to get a response back to you. And we're really excited to continue this podcast. If you want to go ahead and leave us a comment about anything, go ahead. Go ahead and like the video for the YouTube algorithm so we can grow and not just be a small little channel. But even though every one counts, every listener counts, we want to make sure that y'all are getting the best content you can for your time and for your walk in Christ. Guys, thank you so much for watching. And like I said, if you have any questions, let us know. This has been Landon Ends recording at the Standout Podcast. Y'all have a good day.